Howdy YouTube family, it's Bolt SRNA coming to you again with another day's topic. I've had a lot of you hit me up recently and ask me what my normal schedule's like and what's my Monday through Friday like, how's it going with clinicals and what's the schedule like with clinical rotations, so I figured we'd get into it today. So as many of you know, your first year in CRNA school in a front-loaded program is going to be just all classroom stuff. You're going to be in class Monday through Friday, and then you're going to be studying all weekends. So when you start your second year and they start adding in clinical rotations, for my location where I'm at school, it's 3 days a week, usually Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that we're in clinicals every week. And then Tuesday is a dedicated on-campus day where you're in lecture. We're doing OB and Peds right now. So you do OB in the mornings, you do Peds in the afternoon, then you go home and then you prepare for your next morning, which is starting your clinical day. So Tuesday is classwork, lecture time on campus. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is clinical time. And then Monday is usually spent studying. Like a lot of students study for the next upcoming test, or we have two different hybrid classes that we're taking right now that are more doctoral courses, epidemiology and research. And so those two courses require a lot of research, a lot of weekly forum posts, and you have to write a lot of APA style papers, and you have to do a lot of group projects, and a lot of us do Monday. We spend that time on Monday doing that. And then Tuesday, like I said, lecture, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, clinical. And then the weekends is usually your time to catch up on studying for the lecture material that you covered all day Tuesday, because you're probably not going to study much, if any at all, on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, because you will be wiped out from clinical. Your brain won't be working very well, and plus you'll have clinical paperwork to do those nights when you get home. So it's unlikely you'll study at all for your actual lecture stuff on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So most of us spend Saturday and Sunday all day studying that material, and then the cycle begins again the next week. So when I mention clinical paperwork, what I'm talking about is anesthetic care plans. I'm pretty sure almost all programs, if not all of them, make you do this. You have to take your patient that you're supposed to be taking care of, either prospectively or retrospectively, and take their information and create an anesthetic care plan out for them, or write about what you previously did, say the day before. If you're talking about a case from yesterday, then you talk about the anesthesia that you gave, why you gave these certain meds, how the patient responded, what their pre-op assessment was, what their Mallampati scores were, and the atlanto-occipital distance of the patient, and how difficult the intubation was, and the type of blade that you used, and blood pressure changes during the case, and how you treated it, and then was it the right choice. And then they ask you to cite, a lot of times, if you're saying some specific meds you give or something that you did for post-op nausea, vomiting, or whatever, you a lot of times have to cite why that's needed, or what source that came from. And then you have to justify, you critique yourself, and there's a part of it where you critique everything that you did. So you say, like, I wouldn't have done this in the future, and this choice was not the right one, I would have done this instead, or the CRNA or anesthesiologist chose to do this, and I would not have done that in the future when I'm licensed and practice independently. And you have to list reasons why and give sources and stuff. So that's the kind of clinical paperwork I was talking about. Each one usually takes you about an hour. So for our program, we have to do 10 a month. So it's close to almost every clinical day you're going to need to come home and do one. So that can be pretty time consuming, especially when you're tired after all day in clinicals and your brain's just not working well. Now, as far as your actual clinical day, how that goes, it depends on the site that you're going to be at, but I'll tell you a general idea of what it goes like. Most places you will log on to some kind of internet database the night before, and whoever's the board runner for that day will have assigned the next day's SRNAs to a certain case and a certain CRNA or anesthesiologist that you're going to be working with. So you'll find out usually a patient's name or an OR number, or in the diagnosis, and the anesthesia provider the night before. So that gives you an idea of like if you're assigned to a colonoscopy first thing in the morning at 7:30 a.m., you know what time you need to be there, how fast, you know how much time you have to set up for that case the next morning. You know what kind of plan you're going to have. Like if it's a colonoscopy, you're not going to set up an ET tube and all this other stuff, because that would usually, colonoscopies are not, you know, it's max, you know, moderate sedation, whatever. But if you know it's a robotic hysterectomy on your first case for the morning and it's 7 a.m. the case starts, you know you need to get there a little earlier than you normally would have, because it's an earlier start time. And you know that you need to go get your room set up and your anesthesia machine checked and all that done. You need to go figure out what kind of ET tube you need set up. You need to set up, you know, the different meds that you're going to want. You're going to want to pick out your paralytic and what's the best one for that patient. And you have to do all that planning in advance. So most sites, you'll do that. You'll log on, you'll see what your case is, and you'll make a plan for in the morning. And you'll show up in the morning and you will do that plan. And then a lot of times the CRNA is there before the anesthesia provider is going to be there. They let you kind of get your stuff set up, and they usually let you come up with your plan and kind of like, you know, pretend like you're going to take on this whole case. And then before things start, they come to you and say, okay, so what's the plan? And then if they don't like that you want to use rocuronium and they want to use vecuronium, or they point out that you missed the patient has renal failure and you need to use cisatracurium instead of, you know, roc or vec. So they'll tweak your plan, or maybe totally change it altogether and tell you like, I don't want to do that. That's not the way I like to do things, so we'll do it my way. And they'll quickly change it before it's time to go back to the OR room. But you'll come together with your CRNA or anesthesiologist, you'll talk about your plan, they'll critique it, they'll either change it or they'll leave it the same. Then you'll go see the patient. You'll both, you know, introduce yourself to the patient. You'll do a final assessment on the patient. They'll usually watch you to make sure that you're doing an airway assessment and that you're, you know, assessing the patient properly, and that you know all your labs and everything that's important. And then your circulator nurse will usually come in there. They'll take you back with the patient. You'll wheel them back to the OR. You'll get them over on the table, and then you do the whole, I won't go into the whole like intra-op and everything you're gonna do intraoperatively, because it's a whole process and it's not gonna make sense to most of you anyway. But I'll just say, you induce the patient, you intubate, then you know get them going on the machine, and you then monitor them throughout the case, and you keep them steady, making sure that they're safe and that their vital signs are good, and that you're giving medicines for post-op nausea, vomiting. You're giving you know, blood pressure control medicines. You're treating anything that's going on with the patient pretty much. And also analgesia during the case, making sure that they're not going to wake up in pain. You're making sure there's opioids or whatever you're going to use. If you're using a non-opioid technique, you can do that. So anyway, you do that. Then you what is called emergence. You have emergence for your patient. You remove them. You remove the anesthetics from the system, and you let them wake up. And that's kind of a tricky process too, and I won't get into all that. But so essentially you do emergence and you take them to the PACU. And then you do a quick handoff report to the PACU nurse, who wants to usually hear about opioids and some basic stuff that went on the case, and anything that they should be looking out for. They'll do that, and you'll monitor the patient for a couple minutes. If they're stable, you leave. If they're not stable, you don't leave. You stay with them until they're stable if something's wrong. If you have to re-intubate them or something really goes wrong, you have to stay there and fix it. But I've never seen that happen yet, where something's gone terribly wrong. I know it does happen, and it will at some point, but I'm just saying it's not your typical patient that something goes wrong. But anyway, and then you put that patient in PACU, you leave, and then you go find out what your next case is. In the mornings, there's usually a tentative schedule that lets you know, like, you have this case, then this case, then this case, then this case, but you find out really fast when you start rotations that you can never stick to that. The only case that you really know you're gonna have for the day is your very first case. After that first case, there's no telling what's happened. The surgery schedule is constantly changing, and the anesthesia provider schedules is constantly changing to accommodate that changing surgery schedule. So they may you may walk out there and realize this case that you had planned that you would have next has been totally changed. Somebody somebody else is doing that one now, you're doing a whole different case. So you just have to roll with it, and you can't get too upset about changing schedules. You have to be very flexible with anesthesia. So you'll then go with your CRNA to go set up your room pretty rapid for your next case, usually. If there's a gap of time, which that happens sometimes too, maybe you got moved to a case that doesn't start for another 45 minutes or maybe longer. And in that case, you can go see your patient, you can go set the room up to make sure it's, you know, the way you want it for the next case. And then you might have 30 minutes of just downtime in between that to go get a cup of coffee or, you know, help somebody out if you want to, or, you know, whatever. It's very fluid, the way things move in those situations. So that's typically what your day goes like throughout the day. If you work for an anesthesia group that covers surgery centers and OB and all these different other areas of anesthesia that different groups cover, you may end up finding out at lunchtime they want you to go to the surgery center down the road. So you may leave and you may go pick up patients at the surgery center, or you may go to OB and do C-sections and epidurals and stuff. So with anesthesia, it's unusual for you just to stay in one space all the time and not have to go anywhere. It's very common to be like, go here, then here, then here. So anyway, that's kind of the workflow of your typical day in clinicals, and that's gonna go for, you know, till 4 p.m. usually for us. We usually work 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. We can stay longer. I have stayed longer than 4 p.m. before. There's no rule that says you have to go at 4 p.m. And sometimes it kind of looks bad on you if you ask to go at 4 p.m. and there's cases going on or there's interesting stuff happening. So it's really, it's a learning opportunity for you. So it's probably better for you to stay even if you're tired. And so there, you know, you can stay till 9 p.m. that night if you want to and just keep doing cases and doing whatever. But they're usually pretty good about saying, hey, you've been here, you know, 10 or 12 hours, why don't you go? So anyway, that's typically your day. Then you go home. Then, like I said, you're going to be exhausted. Your brain's going to be tired. There's a level of emotional and mental fatigue that I didn't know existed before I started clinical rotations in anesthesia. And when you come home, you just don't even really think straight anymore. Your brain is like mush. And then you have to do that clinical paperwork I said, that I mentioned earlier. So once you're done with that, it may be like 7 p.m. You might eat something and you're probably going to fall asleep. Most of us usually conk out by 8 p.m. and just exhausted. And then you wake up the next morning at 4 or 5 a.m. and you go do it again. And so that's your typical day in anesthesia rotations. I forgot to mention before, another thing that you're going to do when you come home after the end of your clinical day is there will probably have been 10 different times during that clinical day that there's something that came up, a drug that you were going to give, or a procedure that was being done, or a certain gas effect that they mentioned happens with, nitrous or something else, and you knew, like, it's in your head that you remembered learning it, but you don't remember all the details of it from your last year of all didactic stuff. So it drives you nuts while you're in clinical. So you'll either look it up then on maybe your Vargo app on your phone if they let you use your app, or you'll go home that night and you'll research it then, and you'll research up what you've missed and what you didn't remember. So you go home always researching and learning, and you will get asked questions. They're called Pimp Questions is what we call them. And you get asked questions from the anesthesiologist or CRNA throughout your day in clinical, and they usually ask you these questions in tricky moments where you're stressed, or they know that you're going to have to really have your mind focused on something. Maybe you're intubating or putting in a central line or doing an art line or something. That's when they really like to ask you specific difficult questions that kind of make you really think deep and pull back to minor details of the sciences and stuff. And I guess it's their way of making sure that you know it, because it comes out automatically, and possibly because it's traumatic for you in the moment because you're stressed out and upset that they're asking you this question, and it will drill it into your head the correct answer for that question, because you'll always remember it. So anyway, that's just my theories on why they do that, but you will need to prepare to be asked Pimp questions while you're in clinicals. There will be some weeks that you're not in the OR doing actual procedures, and they will ask you to work in PreOp or PostOp sometimes. At some facilities, they'll do like a whole week. Your whole week that week will be just pre-ops every day, and they just want you to get really good at doing pre-ops. They want you to get really good at putting in IVs on dehydrated NPO patients who, you know, probably have lots of comorbidities because they're having to have surgery done. There's a skill to that. You really want to be good at difficult IVs and anesthesia, so that's helpful. But yeah, you'll do a lot of paperwork those weeks, and you'll go see patients post-op on the floor a lot of times, and go see them maybe the day after they've had surgery and make sure they've had no complications with anesthesia, that nothing's wrong, that there's not some kind of intractable pain that you need to help take care of. That's some general things that you do that's outside of the actual OR doing anesthesia. And you don't have to do that a whole lot, but they're usually, most sites in maybe 2 months of time will make you do like a week or maybe 2 weeks of doing that. So it's not the majority of your time, but you will do that some. Well, all right, that was everything. I gave you the whole spiel on all the things that go on with clinical. If you have any other questions, you can hit me up in the comments below, or follow me on Instagram. You can send me messages there. A lot of you guys do that. So that's Bolt out.